So the point of this Qualoupe class is to show you how you can understand and edit the formatted numbers that are used within Qualoupe. So what I mean by a formatted number is, if I go to the batch manager, it suddenly decided to go slowly. Oh, here we go. And I create a new record, save my changes. It automatically generates a batch ID. It's a system-generated batch ID, and it's prefixed with BAT. Then it's got the year, and then it's got a series of numbers on the end. It's batch number 4, apparently. So that's just the batch, but it's the same for sample ID, invoice numbers, order numbers, all the sort of numbers that are generated automatically by the system. And these are all, the format of these is all governed by this application here, formatted number. So I'm going to take a look through that and tell you what all the fields are and how you can understand what it's doing and how you can edit it should you feel that you wanted to do that. So it opens up with the records preloaded, and I've just looked at batch and it's opened up in batch. So I'll tell you what they all are. We'll just take you through a quick tour through some of these. So table and column should be fairly self-explanatory. This is the table, the database table that contains the value that's being updated, and that's the ID that's being updated. Now the reason it's table rather than application is, you know, you say, well, batch, that's batch manager, but actually in the background it's the batch table. If you look here, mysteriously we've got 2 sample ones. If I click on the first one, looking at that, I'll come back and look at this again a bit later, but that's the settings for if you create batches of samples. And the reason I know that is we've got child values here and we've got batch ID in there. The other one is if you're creating samples through the sample manager, so that's the settings for that. So they both say sample because they're both updating the sample table. So you just have to know, judge which one's which by context. So when I've explained what all the different fields are, hopefully it'll be easier for you to spot what they are. I know that at least one of you is splitting samples and stuff, and we'll come back to this view in a bit because it explains about what happens when you split samples and how the sample IDs are generated. So this is why it's the table rather than the application name, but it should be enough information to recognize where the ID is, and it's batch ID. Okay, so then we go on to the format. Now you can see in here we've got percentage and then YYYY and then NNNN. So obviously 4 Ys stands for the year and N is just number. Oops, didn't want to do that. I've accidentally copied and pasted it. Never mind, I just won't save it. Or I could just type it in again. You could also put in DD, NNNN. So you can put in Y's for year, W for week, M for month, N for a number, M for minutes, H for hours if you want to, and J for a Julian date. So you can manipulate this to suit you. I quite like that one myself because I can always look at the sample ID, or in this case the batch ID, and know the year, the month and the day it was created. So that's sort of my personal favourite in amongst this lot. Save. That should have changed it. Okay, so if you have a percentage at the beginning, as this does, and you have something in text data, whatever you have in text data goes in where that percentage is in the format. So if we remember the batch I just created, it was prefixed with the word BAT. So if I take out the A and the T, save the changes, I will just launch, I think it's on my Favourites tab, I'll just launch the Batch Manager again. Hopefully it'll launch at some time today. There we go. Create a new record, save my changes. So now it's got B instead of BAT, and it's got, I'm not convinced about that date though, 06, I think my system date must be set wrong, because that's not correct, is it? It's not the 20th of June. Never mind. However, you can see that it's changed it. I think the system date on the server must be completely wrong. I have to check that out later. So so that's the format anyway, so you can fiddle around with that. I'll set it back to what it was before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think. If I fiddle with these communal databases, someone will complain later on when I've changed stuff. Okay, now sub-format here, same sort of thing. It's used with sample splitting. So I'll come back and have a look at that again in a moment when we're looking at the batch. But if you split a sample, depending on how you've got it set up, you can have the numbering of your split samples can be NNN or N or YYNN or that sort of thing. It's the same choices that you can put in here anyway. So I'll give you an example of that shortly. Okay, text data, that will go into this number wherever there's a percentage. So if I put percentage on the end there, oh, it doesn't like that. I think it doesn't like that very much at all. Hang on a minute. I know you can put more percentages in here. Oh, I need to put in an extra value into here. That's why it went red. So I could put in, here we are, sensible bit of text. What would happen if I saved this? I'm not going to because it's silly. But if I saved this, the batch number would be prefixed with BAT. Then you'd have the year, and then at the position of the second percentage, you'd get your second bit of text. But as I said, I'm going to take that out because I don't necessarily want that. But it does mean that you could build up quite a sophisticated automatic format for your IDs if you wanted to, if there were bits that you need to put in there. Presumably because I didn't put that comma in, I could do it like that. I don't know, X. So that means it would all end with an X. So you wouldn't necessarily want to do that, but you might want to put some sensible text in there. Okay, so this takes me on to reset period. So this is number of days after which you want the numbering to be reset. So we've got the year and then, what's that, 6 ends. So if you have got a certain number of batches within 2011, when you go to 2012, it'll reset on the 1st of January, and your numbering will then be 2012 000001. And obviously you could change this. If you incorporated the month into here, you might want this reset every 30 days. So default, obviously if it's got the year in it, reset it once a year, every 365 days, seems a reasonable sort of thing to do. This works in combination with the offset. So if, for example, we had, I'm trying to think, if we put weeks in here, which is small w, I think it's one small w. So if I put the week number, so I had year, week, and then number, and I set that to 7, is it going to let me do it? Oh, it's actually giving you numeric then. Okay, week. That's interesting. Okay, so it's resetting it to the week anyway, and I've got the week number included in here. It'll reset, so it'll say year, week, and then number, and then next week, next Monday, it'll reset and the week number will go up and the number will start from 1 again. And there is an offset here. So, for example, if you wanted your numbering to start on Wednesday, you would set that to 2, because the first day of the week, as far as the system is concerned, is Monday. So if you wanted your numbering to start on Sunday, or the Monday, you'd put in an offset of 6. I think I'm right, my maths is a bit dodgy. So you can be flexible about when the numbering starts, how often the numbering is reset, what day of the week the numbering starts on. I think if you change this back to year and put in a number of days, as I said, I'm not going to bother counting this up, but say I put in 31, in fact I should put in 32, your numbering would reset on the 1st of February. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but I suppose if you had an academic year or an accountancy year, you know, a financial year, you might want to restart your numbering at the beginning of the financial year. So you just work out how many days that is. I've no idea how many days the end of April is, and or the end of March, I think, isn't it? And put that in there. Okay. Now the last number shows you the last number that was used. So if I go to the batch manager, it's got a 5 on the end because the last batch that was created was batch 5. However, I'm just going to go elsewhere and abandon my peculiar edits. Is it going to let me do it? Yes. Right, so now I should be back to how it was before. So see the last number there is 5. If I go into the batch manager and create a new record, it's now batch number 6. And oops, I need to refresh this. I'll go back out and in again. The last number is now 6. So what you can do with this is generally don't fiddle with it. I mean, if I edited that and changed that to a 5, then I could have all sorts of problems because it would try and create a new batch 6, and batch 6 already exists. So the general rule with the last number is don't fiddle with it. But, however, say you got your Qualoupe system installed and you'd had a test run with it and you'd put some data in and you'd said, right, I'm happy with this. Now I want to clear out all my test data and go live with new data. As part of that process, having cleared out your data, you can reset all the numbers to 0 or to 1 so that any new samples or batches or invoices or whatever that you create start numbering afresh. So, you know, once you've gone live, you might not want all your numbers to start at a random number somewhere up the sequence. So you can use that for resetting. This field here, last update, is not editable because that holds the date that the system last reset the numbering. So this is set to reset every year, and we haven't been round a year at the installation of this database yet, so this isn't populated, but on the 1st of January 2012 that would be populated. So it's populated by the system to tell you when the update was done by the system, so you can't edit it, but you can just look at it. And then we have number by, which has got specific functionality, which I'll show you again in a second, but it's always got to have a value in it, and if you leave an asterisk in it, what happens is it'll just continue sequentially numbering 7, 8, 9, 10 forever and ever until your reset period. So if I go and have a look at this one, sample, so this is the same sort of thing for our sample ID. We've got year and 5 numbers. Our last number was 158, number by star. So if I go into the sample manager, I'll just launch that in a new tab. We'll get there in a second. I was just going to create a new sample, so if I go new record, I'm not going to bother putting any extra information in it, so it's 159. If I go back into here, click away from it and back to it again, you can see the last number is 159. So the sample formatted numbers record that looks like this with a star in number by, no information here, is the sequence of IDs when you're entering results from the sample, sorry, when you're entering samples into the sample manager. If I go to the other one, this is used for batch numbering, and I think this is going to be of particular interest to people who are entering batches of samples. So for the first thing we've got in here, which we didn't have before, is we've got sub-format. So we've got -NN. So if I go off into a batch, here's my new one, and I'll add some samples. Let's put 3 samples on this batch. Add and save changes. Okay, so I've got 3 samples have gone in there. Now if we look at the sample manager, look at the formatted numbers manager again and go back in and out again, you can see that that batch, which is number 6, has now been added to this list, and there's a separate list here of the sample numbering for samples created in the batch manager. In other words, I've created 3 samples, and the samples have given the batch ID and then 1, 2 and 3. So in here it said last number is 3. So if I was to add another sample, I'll just add a single sample. I think I'll put a material on this one. Add, save. So that's gone in as number 4. If I go back into here, oops, I need to click on that and away again. So last number is 4. So you can see that for the numbering for samples created in the batch manager, it's keeping a separate tally of how many samples you've got on that batch. So it knows that if I create another one on that batch, it's going to be number 5. If I create another sample in that batch, it's going to be number 15. So it's keeping all these separate counts. And the format of my number, if I go back into the batch manager, you can see it's 00001. So in other words, 5 numbers. If I go back into here, we can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 N's. So it's doing what it's supposed to, and there's a hyphen, and you can see it's actually got a little hyphen in there, so it's hyphen 5 N's. Now, 2 things are happening in here. I'll come back to sub-format again in a second. The first thing is number by is got batch ID in it. So in other words, it's telling it to keep a separate sequence of numbers, sorry, getting tangled up in words here, a separate sequence of numbers for each batch. And also, what happens here is the percentage at the beginning of the format is replaced by whatever's in batch ID. So if we go back into here, we can see the batch ID, which has got its own format, has gone in place of the percentage. Then we get hyphen 5 numbers. Is that clear to everybody? Yep. It's all gone quiet. Good-o. So if you can alter the format of that, but the batch ID is going to go in place of that percentage. You can also still include text in here. I think if you put a percentage, you can put your prefix X, Y, Z. So you can also put in extra bits of text. So I could put 2 percentages there and have, SAM. So I'd have BAT, blah, blah. In fact, I'd probably put that in the wrong place. No, hang on. I'd probably put that in the wrong place. I could put it there. So you'd have BAT, the batch number, batch ID, which is BAT and a number, hyphen, and then SAM and a number for sample. So you can still use them in combination if you want to get really complicated. Your systems will all have been set up like this. The number of N's you've got might vary, but they've all been set up like this for an example. But if you had some company rules that meant you had to include other stuff, you can still do it. The first percentage will always be whatever you've got in batch ID. So that when it's creating the sample ID, the first thing it does is it looks in the number by and looks for a percentage and replaces the percentage with the batch ID, and then anything else that happens after that is the normal rules apply. So the other thing in here, we've got sub-format, which is -NN. So if I decide I want to split this sample, so the one physical sample is going to become 2 or 3 smaller subsamples for separate testing. If I click on split samples and I say I want 3 splits, split, and I believe I actually have to at this point assign them to a material, so I'll just give them the same old material. Save. Yes. Okay, so when I've split the samples, you can see there's my original sample, 004, and then we've got 004, 01, 02, 03. And this relates to NN, so that's replaced with 01, 02, 03, which is what we've got there. So I think some of the systems we've got have been installed with 4 N's, so you get 00001. I don't know how many splits people would typically do, and you might think, well, we've got 4 N's, but we're never going to do more than about 20 splits, so we can probably reduce it down to 2 N's to keep the number a bit smaller, a bit more manageable. Okay, so that's a quick run through it. They're all fairly similar. So if I went to invoice, that's been set up very similar to batch, except the invoice number is going to be prefixed with inv. I don't know if anyone's put run for run number, Q for quotations. So they've set these all up in the same sort of way. I think that's just an example, so you could change it if you wanted to. But the only real difference is the first one of the samples is samples created in batch. It doesn't actually say anywhere, this is for samples created with Batch Manager. This is for samples created with Sample Manager. You've just got to infer it by looking at this screen and say, oh, it's got Batch ID there. I should say that you don't really want to come in here and fiddle with this on a day-to-day basis, because obviously if you've got the least serious thing that could happen was, say you had a report that's ordering things alphabetically by the batch ID, and you just had your batch ID was NNNNN, and then someone says, oh, we're going to change this so it's Julian date. So then the beginning, you might be ordering it numerically, and then suddenly it starts off with Julian date and numbers on the end. So the least bad thing it could do is throw your reports out, so the ordering's not correct. But what you could do, if you're not careful, as I said before, especially with that one, is, say I went in here and thought, I know what I'll do, I'll reset this to 2. What would happen is, when the system comes to insert the new sample ID, it tries to create 2011000002. It discovers there's already one of those in the system, and it throws a wobbly and gives you an error message. So it's the sort of thing that the system administrator is aware that can be done and makes an informed decision about how these numbers need to be set up at the beginning of setting up your system before you go live. And I'm not saying you can't change it, just be aware that there might be some comeback a bit later on. Okay, so I think this is all actually explained reasonably well in the administrator manual as well, the same information. And obviously this class is going to be stuck up on YouTube, so you can review it again later. And I will answer any question that anyone's got in a moment. I'm going to say thank you for attending the class anyway. Hope you got something out of it, and I'll hang around afterwards for questions.